Welcome from Indianapolis. I am Derwin Smiley. On today's show, I will have a conversation with Courtney Galyan, the president of CG Bear Enterprises, to discuss his ambitious business endeavor with the Marco's Pizza chain. I am glad you are with me. The conversation with Courtney Galyan starts right now. Courtney Galyan is the president of CG Bear Enterprises. Mr. Galyan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Derwin. Appreciate having me.
How you doing today?
Oh, fantastic. Yourself?
Wonderful.
Good.
You always, every time I see you, you always have this smile on your face.
You got to be optimistic some days, right?
Optimistic or hopeful.
Exactly.
Okay. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I'll get the formalities out of the way. I'm 29. Actually, I just turned 30 this weekend, but I still kind of want to linger on the 29-year-old. I don't want to lose that too. But 29, just turned 30 this weekend, and I grew up here in Indianapolis, born and raised. I've lived in various parts of the country, but grew up here. Went to Brebeuf High School and DePaul University, and then went out to University of Denver and came back to Indianapolis. And I'm not married, no family currently right now, so it kind of allows me to get some additional work done that wouldn't under normal circumstances get done. But I grew up here. I got started in college. Out of college, I got started in real estate, and I progressed in there. When I graduated from school, I didn't really know what it was I wanted to do. I was kind of one of those kids who wasn't sure what direction I wanted to move, but I had a lot of energy, a lot of spunk, as some would say. So I got started in commercial real estate, and never really had a knack for it. Kind of liked what I was doing, but I didn't really know exactly what it was I was doing. I was still trying to learn the ins and outs of it. And the company I got started with was here out of Indianapolis, and they were a kind of a semi-large mall developer. And so I started at the bottom, just doing legwork, making copies, picking up coffee, things like that, and really just kind of paying attention to what other people did. And I progressed from there. And as I got more in depth in the company, I kind of realized that I was interested in the real estate development game, and I wanted to progress and see how I could do with it. And as time went on, I got involved with more of the mall development on the construction side. So I started doing some tenant coordination work. Here, actually, Metropolis, which many locals here would know. I worked on that project for a while, and then as time progressed, I kind of knew that I needed to leave the company. Unfortunately, the company is no longer around. They went under, but I decided to leave before that happened, and I got started with another firm here in Indianapolis called Gershman Brown Crowley. And I started with them right out of the gate, young, 23, maybe 24-year-old kid. Just really excited. I wanted to do something. I was working a lot. I got started with them, and within the first 5 days of being employed by them, they shipped me off to the East Coast, and it was kind of a sink or swim, scenario. And so I went out to the East Coast and started working on CVS real estate development, CVS pharmacy, and our job was to do all the financing, do all the market analysis, site selection, development management, construction management, all throughout New England. And basically, they dropped me off on the East Coast and said, let's see what you can do. So I pulled together a couple deals and, slowly started climbing up pretty quickly, and, escalated within the company rapidly, and started working, towards the vice president of real estate for the company, and really enjoyed it, and, so that's kind of the background, my history as far as work related, besides what I'm doing now with Marco's Pizza. But and I can get into that a little bit more. But as far as me personally, as I mentioned, I grew up here in Indianapolis. I've got a very strong, family connection here, and part of my family lives out in Montana as well, and we're very outdoorsy given some of our background, and so I really enjoy the outdoors. I do a lot of triathlons, which I'm actively involved in right now, and we were talking that before the show started, and that keeps me pretty occupied outside of work. I compete competitively in the Ironman. Distances and everything else in between. And, I'm really enthusiastic about everything. I like to try new things. I know a lot of people say that, but I really am. I like to do anything and everything that I've not done at least twice. My feeling is if you try it try it the first time you didn't like it, maybe you just had a bad experience. So I want to give everything, that I haven't done, another chance. Travel a lot. I've been fortunate to be able, travel around the world, a number of times. I've been to, great countries like Argentina, Australia, China. I've even done dog sledding up in the Arctic Circle, which is kind of a rarity. But a lot of those things have been able to set a foundation for who I've become, and allowed me to take a lot of those cultures and a lot of the things I've learned and kind of implement them into my daily life and my work ethic and my business and in my interactions with people. And it's been a blessing to be able to travel and have the energy to promote the ideals that I like to promote and enjoy myself as I am now.
I think there's you ran through a gamut of things, and
yes, I did.
Let me go back and piggyback on some of the things. When you said I think you said when you got shipped out into the East Coast, how did you get away from that fear from getting away? You said you grew up here in Indiana pretty much all your life. How big of that fear did you have to overcome to say, now I'm going out to the East Coast?
There was a little bit of trepidation as far as, picking up and moving out there, but I wasn't too terribly fearful of it, just because, for example, when I was mentioning the travel, I've been fortunate enough to be able to experience some other parts of the country, and so I knew what I was kind of getting into. There's a lot of different mental shifts, coming from the Midwest to the East Coast. It's a much faster pace of life. People are a little bit more, hard-nosed than they are here, and less forgiving. But as far as the fear, it took me about a week, to get over that. It was kind of you just had to figure it out and get through it. It was definitely a hurdle to overcome.
So how fearful were your parents? You said I'm going.
My parents are too. My mother and my dad are very different. They're opposite ends of the spectrum. My dad knew I'd be fine, and his philosophy has always been, if it doesn't kill you, you'll be all right. Until my life is threatening, he usually doesn't start concerning himself. My mom, on the other hand, was a little bit concerned, because she was afraid that she wasn't going to see me, and I'd get out there and never come back. So I think that was probably the big fearful part for her. So
I think another thing you said, pretty much when you went through high school, you went through college, you really didn't know what you wanted to do with your life. How did you navigate through that whole thing to get where you are today?
To be honest, I've been fortunate enough to kind of been one of those, to be one of those people that I've been able to, there's been a lot of things in my life that kind of have dictated or have driven me to certain avenues, and I'm a big believer that the laws of attraction. If you have negativity, you attract negativity. If you have positivity, you attract positivity. And I always tell the people that work for me or anybody else that listens, as long as you keep the momentum moving forward, you'll find something that you like, or it'll find you. And I kind of used that throughout college, not even knowing what the principal philosophy of it was. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of coupled that, into my core beliefs today. So it's like in football. When you're a running back, you keep your legs moving forward. You'll get positive yards. And it's the same thing in life. As long as you keep moving forward, try something. You'll always have reasonably good results.
So tell me, where do you get your passion from? Or were you just a hype kid running around?
I was a hype kid, but I didn't have any direction other than sports. Growing up, football and baseball and lacrosse. I mean, those were my things. And once towards the end of high school, I started getting a little bit more serious about academics. But I really just got by on decent grades. Didn't put a whole lot of work ethic into my academics. And when I hit about 22 years old, I had a couple life-changing events, and it just sparked something in me. It ignited a fire in me that I've run with ever since, and it's given me a lot of power and energy to do a lot of things that I've wanted to do. Just about every goal I've set out to achieve, I've achieved.
I want you to hold that thought. We have to take a break right now. Here's Courtney Galyan, president of CG Bear Enterprises. Stay with us.
Discover yourself in the new IPS.
More options than any other school district.
Diesel engine repair.
The only district with performing arts magnet schools from elementary through high school.
IPS is revolutionizing education. Discover the new IPS for yourself.
Visit the Derwin Smiley Show online for weekly blogs, previous shows, the television schedule, sponsorship information, or to post a comment or show idea. We want to hear from you and find out how we can inspire the greatness in you. Log on to www.thederwinsmileyshow.com today.
Thank you for staying with us. We will continue our conversation with Courtney Galyan, the president of CG Bear Enterprises. Mr. Galyan, before you left, we was talking about how you navigated to find your path in life. Continue with that.
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned earlier is, motion. Continuously stay in movement or in motion. I always believe that you may not know what it is you want to do, but as long as you keep trying something, it doesn't matter what you try. As long as you keep trying something, you'll find a path that you like. And I think it's as equally as important to try things that you don't like. I remember my first job out of college. I liked the company, hated the job, but I learned a lot about it. I learned a lot about how not to manage people. I learned a lot about it wasn't the management staff that I worked under, necessarily taught me that, but I learned things that I want to do and things that I don't want to do. So the negative, the negative things that you experience in your life can be as equally of a learning, experience as even the positive ones. So trying to manage that and put all that into, momentum, it's been kind of difficult, but as long as you keep moving forward and trying new things, I think you'll end up finding the things that you want to do.
I want you to give me a history lesson right now. Take me back to how the Galyan Enterprise came about.
Yeah, Galyan, you're referring to Galyan Sporting Goods,
Yes.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Galyan's was started by my grandfather many, many years ago, nearly 60 years ago, and it was a grocery store here in Indianapolis, well, more appropriately, Plainfield, Indiana. And, back then, grocery stores were more than just grocery stores. They were, places where people could trade, hard goods, hardware, sporting goods, things like that. But they also sold meats and cheeses and all the, primary grocery store items as well. And he expanded that into, I think, 3 stores and then eventually 4 stores. And my grandfather got sick, and my dad was the youngest of 5. And when my grandfather got sick, my dad was the one who stepped up and was most interested in taking over the business. And so he had worked out a deal and took over the company. However, how it made the transition from grocery into sporting goods was we bought a camp probably about 50 years ago up in Canada, in the middle of nowhere, and it required a lot of outdoor tools, knives, guns, camping gear, hunting gear, things like that. And so he cornered off a section of the grocery store for a trading post, i.e. Galyan's Trading Company or Trading Post. And so when my grandfather passed, my dad saw a niche for sporting goods over grocery. And so he started building up the sporting goods side of things, and he consolidated down into the one store, which was Plainfield, and expanded it from there. And I hear a lot of learning experiences about the way he had to go through business, the hard way. And he didn't unfortunately have somebody there to help guide him. He had to go through trials and tribulations himself. So he made a lot of mistakes, but did a lot of great things, as well. And he started to expand it within the Indianapolis market. And he grew from 1 store to 2 stores to 3 stores. And I think the pinnacle, which started gaining Galyan some national attention, or at least regional, was when he opened up the Castleton store. Back then, Castleton, or still is, the central hub for a lot of retailers and real estate throughout the city. And he was one of the dominant forces that opened up in that area. And it really catapulted him into expanding outside of the Indianapolis market. And he expanded into Columbus, Ohio. And from Columbus, started opening up more and more stores throughout the country. It caught the attention of the Limited Company, who they own the Limited 2, Express, and many other retail tenants, and they decided to make a play to buy Galyan's. And so my dad negotiated a deal with him, sold it to him, stayed on board with him, and expanded rapidly, with some more funding. And so he opened up in Minneapolis and Atlanta and Boston and Denver and throughout other regions of the country, and did really well. But Galyan's was unique. Galyan's was one of a kind. To talk about it in the same light as, in my opinion, as Dick's Sporting Goods is not necessarily fair, because it was such a unique experience. People would go into the store and they had the 30-second rule, 30 within 30, I think it was. If you could get to them, or it may have been 15 or 15. If you could get to them in 15 seconds or 15 feet, you had to talk to them. You don't get that customer service anymore these days. And customer service and good product selection carries you, light years ahead of the competition. And Galyan's had that. They were cunning, and they were ingenious in their retail style, and they also coupled that with, great designs and unique, architectural features within the store, and people loved going in there. I remember when I was a kid, people would always talk about going into Galyan's and their experience, growing up as a kid, and people still show me stuff that they own and bought from Galyan's with the logos on it, and it's a great experience, and you don't have that anymore. So when Galyan sold to Dick's Sporting Goods, it lost that luster, unfortunately. But as far as my family's concerned, I knew my dad made the right decision, and I supported his decision in getting out when he did, and I'm really close with my dad, and I knew the stress was kind of weighing on him, and I'm happy to see that he's healthy now, and not that he was unhealthy then, but there was a lot of burden for him to carry, and he can enjoy his life the way he wants to enjoy it now.
So how important is family to you?
Family, I look at family as a multifaceted term. I don't consider blood necessarily as being the definition of family. But for this discussion, it's extraordinarily important. My family are my friends. My family are my employees. My family are my family. My mother, my father, my brother, my two sisters. My stepmother, my stepdad. It's very important. They've given me the tools. Let me back up for a second. They have laid down a foundation or a pathway for me to help follow, and whenever I got off that pathway, they were sure to let me know. But without them, you are misguided, misdirected, and they give you a lot of great tools to be able to address the dangers of this life. I mean, there's a lot of things in this world that can go wrong, and without your family and without that support, you have no support, you have no foundation. So family is extraordinarily important to me, and even beyond my blood relatives, my friends. I'm fortunate enough to work with some very close friends of mine, who've both become great business partners with me, and also very good friends and confidants that I can rely on and trust. And when we set out to start CG Bear Enterprises, I said to myself, okay, who are the people that I trust the most, and who do I want to grow the most with? And they happen to be my peer group and guys that I knew for a long time. My attorneys, my fraternity brother from DePaul, my accountant is a fellow philanthropic member of mine in Penrod. And these are guys who are my age, and they both have similar goals and aspirations, and by aligning or attuning theirs with mine, we can achieve some great goals. And even outside of that, my close friends, maybe the ones who I don't even do business with, I rely on them very, very heavily. I consider them my family as well. One of my best friends I've been friends with since I was 6 years old. He knows everything about me. I know everything about him. And when you're starting to get out of line in life, they can help, guide you back, or you can bounce ideas off them. And it's really important to have that.
We have to take another break, but I want you to think about this question. How do you deal with failure? Here's Courtney Galyan. Stay with us.
It's how I keep in contact with my child's teacher without leaving my home.
It's how I know what my child is studying so I can help them with their homework.
It's how I know my child is getting good grades in school.
It is how I know my child is getting the best education possible by using the newest educational tools.
IPS Online provides more communication and information than ever before. Log on and learn more about getting connected.
Thank you for staying with us. When we went to break, I asked Mr. Galyan this question: how do you deal with failure?
I think failure is, a very important part of life. Everybody goes through failure, and there's really two ways to deal with it. You can either run from it or you can embrace it. And not to say that I've done either one all the time or do either one well, but without your failures, you don't grow. It's kind of like working out. When you don't break down your muscles, you don't grow. So if you're not taking risks or being adventurous or doing things that are going to test your limitations, because you're fearful of failing, well, you're never going to grow either as a person or as business or spiritually or emotionally or even financially. All those aspects of life that people try to achieve in their lifetime, they're all interconnected. Financially, having a sound financial bank account or a sound spiritual bank account or sound emotional bank account, a lot of those are related, and they're predicated upon people's fears, in my opinion. A lot of what people do in their lifetime or within their life is dictated by how fearful they are. So you can do one of two things. You can either avoid fear and not try anything, or you can try to embrace it and just say, look, if I fail here, if I fail, what am I going to do? I'm going to get up and try it again. And that's really what you have to do. You know, this week's been, you know, we sat down today and, you know, explained to you how, you know, kind of tough this week's been on us. You know, we've had, you know, some deals that were, you know, kind of in the verge of falling apart, you know, and I was, you know, fearful of losing those and, you know, the failure and losing those deals. But, you know, you have to push through them and, you know, try to get them together and do everything you can, you know, to make them work. And, you know, failure can be, you know, a strong motivator. You know, it can be a very, very strong motivator. And, you know, I always look at the people, you know, who are the most successful, and I count how many times they failed versus how many times they succeeded. You know, and the ratios are amazing. You know, they failed many more times than they ever succeeded. And, you know, that tells me something. And it tells me, A, they were willing to take risks. B, they weren't fearful of failing. And, you know, C, they knew that it was a part of growing up and part of their learning experience, and they had to learn from it. And, you know, in order to better yourself as a person in every regard, as I mentioned earlier, you know, emotionally and spiritually and all those other aspects, you got to be willing to take chances. So
I want to jump into this ambitious and business endeavor that you have with Marco's Pizza as an entrepreneur. What skills should an entrepreneur possess?
You got to have heart, you got to have spirit, and you got to have determination. You know, I remember one time listening to my dad talk about Wizard of Oz, you know, the Scarecrow and the Lion and those guys. He said, you know, after they got everything that they needed, those are the skills. You got to have heart, you got to have brains, you got to have determination. You know, and brains, for example, you know, intellect, yeah, you got to be intellectually sound, but you don't even have to be the smartest person in the room. You got to just be willing to take a chance, you know, and jump on something. And, you know, with work ethic, you know, and motivation and drive, they can carry you so much farther. You know, I always, you know, look at sports teams, for example. You know, some of the best football teams, or some of the football teams with the most talent out there, they're not the best. You know, you look at like the Patriots or even the Colts, for example. You know, the reason why they're always on top is because they always work. They always work hard. You know, they don't let, you know, the egos get in the way. You know, and they step aside and they have good coaching, good leadership. You know, and you got to be a great leader in order to have a successful business.
So let's talk about this Marco's Pizza endeavor. Take me through it. What is Marco's Pizza, and what separates Marco's from every other pizza chain?
Absolutely. Marco's Pizza is right now the fastest growing pizza chain in the country. It's a 32-year-old company born out of Toledo, Ohio. The founder, Pat, was an Italian immigrant who came over here and he started his company. And basically what he said was, there's no good pizza around. So what am I going to do? So he started his own shop, you know, based upon the foundation of great dough, you know, great crust, you know, a blend of 3 of the highest grade cheeses, and a, you know, sauce recipe that is, you know, better than everybody else out there. And he said, and we're going to create great customer service and a great product, and we're going to see how we do. And he did phenomenally well throughout the years, you know, for about 25 to 27 years, you know, built a great company in the Toledo, you know, Ohio and Michigan region. Marco's is now in the franchising mode, and they're starting to expand all throughout the country. California, Oklahoma, Denver, the Bahamas even, Indiana, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. So they're everywhere. The thing about Marco's that separates us, you know, is, well, let me back up for a second. There's pizza companies all across, and every retailer and every concept out there, you know, there's always multiple competitors. There's just so many people in this world that you can't avoid, you know, the competition. So how do you beat the competition? You do something a little bit better than the competition does, and you give them customer service. And that's what Marco's is built upon. And, you know, we are one of the only, you know, national pizza chains that makes, you know, all of our ingredients in the store. Our dough is made fresh every single day. You know, we mix our dough every day. We roll our dough every day. We store it. We let it, you know, we let it breathe. You know, we make all of our product in the store every day. You know, we prep all of our items. You know, Papa John's and Domino's and Donato's. You know, everything's shipped in. Everything's frozen. We don't freeze anything. You know, we believe in a great foundation, which is our crust, great cheese, and great sauce, just like our founder, you know, created.
So let's talk about your endeavor. I think I had a meeting with you a while back, and when I was doing the research about you, it's like you want to, I think, 10 Marco Pizza stores here in Indianapolis within 5 years. I thought, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, you were asking about ambition earlier. When I started, I had no idea how many stores we wanted to do. And once we signed the contracts with Marco's, I immediately was like, well, we got to blow this out of the water. We got to do more. We got to do more. You know, so what we did is we signed up for a 10-store development agreement here in Indianapolis. We've got 1 store open, and we've got our 2nd store opening here next month in October in Noblesville. And we've only been open for 6 months. So we went, you know, from standing still to opening as many stores as we can, within our limitations, of course. And we've also bought the rights to the Minneapolis, Minnesota market as well, which is another 40-store development agreement. And really what we're trying to create is, when I open a store, I don't want to create the semblance of a national pizza chain. I want to create the ambiance of a local, community-based organization, which can not only give back to the community, but be part of the community as it grows and matures in every facet possible.
I know I have like 1 minute left. Talk to me. Why is it important to give back to the community?
Well, you give away, you get back. You know, it's really that simple. You know, the most important, it's like family. You asked about family earlier. If you don't give to your family's not going to give it to you. You got to look at your community as being the breadwinner for your business. You know, those are the people that are supporting you, and you got to support them. Without them, you know, they're going to leave you in the dust. And you got to build that relationship. You know, they're your lifeline to business, and they're the ones you can count on.
Here's Mr. Courtney Galyan, the president of CG Bear Enterprises. Mr. Galyan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Discover the new IPS.
More options than any other Indiana school district.
3 Montessori schools.
The internationally renowned Key Learning Community.
2 Centers for Inquiry.
Venice Immersion.
Elementary schools with excellent programs to help your child learn and be successful.
IPS is revolutionizing education. Discover the new IPS for yourself.
Visit the Derwin Smiley Show online for weekly blogs, previous shows, the television schedule, sponsorship information, or to post a comment or show idea. We want to hear from you and find out how we can inspire the greatness in you. Log on to www.thederwinsmileyshow.com today.
That's our show for this evening. And remember, you can follow us on the World Wide Web at thederwinsmileyshow.com. And remember, my sole purpose is to inspire greatness in you. I'll see you next time.